On behalf of Nalsar, I welcome Justice Mukul Mudgal. I've been saying this a few times, but I think it shows the sign of institutional maturity that students are setting up these talks right from scratch. So thanks to the Nyaya Forum for getting in touch with Justice Mudgal and persuading him to come here. So Justice Mudgal had served on the Delhi High Court for a substantial period of time. He retired as the Chief Justice of the Punjab and Haryana High Court. But in the last few years, many of you have read about him, especially in his work when it comes to sports regulation. What he had preferred to do is he would prefer to speak to you briefly about his own career and his own experience in the judiciary. But he just mentioned that he would like to spend more time in interaction and Q&A. So we'll possibly try and respect that. And if you do have questions, we will pass the mic around. So you can, as we normally, the practice is for you to identify yourself and ask your question. So we should be able to have some meaningful time for question and answers today. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Dear members of the staff and dear students, first of all, I'm delighted to see you in casuals. I've been to law schools where the students look like corporate slaves wearing black things. So it's very good to be. All strength to your teachers and your Vice Chancellor who have permitted you to do so, because I went to college, it was a very relaxed atmosphere, as I see here. And frankly, attendance was not compulsory. Okay, those days have gone. Those days have gone. We have competition today. All right. What I'd like to do is, got a little misunderstanding about the topic which we are to discuss. I was told that it has to do with sports law. Unfortunately, sports law doesn't have much litigation. So the things are in theory. There's an IPL report. I'm doing some governance review as the deputy chairman of the FIFA governance committee. That's very boring, and let me assure you. I don't think it will interest you. But I'd like you to tell you, you can certainly ask questions, whichever you like. And rest assured, I hated long speeches, so it won't be one. It'll be a bit of both. Okay, now I'll speak more about my experience. It's 25 years as a lawyer in Supreme Court and about 14 years as a judge. So I'll speak to you from both sides, how it is to be a litigating lawyer and not one of those corporate office persons who turn out contracts and all, which I know nothing about and I don't want to know anything about. Now, unfortunately or fortunately, the base of all litigation is your pleading, your drafting. There's 3 or 4 things to remember in drafting. One, the drafting must be brief, to the point. It must pinpoint the injustice or the error you're wanting to bring out. Whatever is the relevant provision, please extract it in your pleadings, because rest assured, when the judge goes home and he's trying to dictate a judgment and you have not extracted the relevant section in the pleading, he is not going to get up and take out the section, look at it. He'll get irritated and probably you'll get the wrong end of the stick. So whatever is relevant, please put it. The provision, supposing you're in appeal, then the portion which is most glaringly wrong should be extracted in your pleadings. So that the judge knows you have to prepare a good list of dates and a short synopsis. This will always help. And do not burden with excessive case law. Take out your best and say others' cases also hold the same view. Now, the other thing is, which goes without saying, that you must be well prepared. Especially when you start as juniors, most of you will be sent to get adjournments. There are judges who would say, all right, why don't you start arguing? I was like that. I would say, okay, start. I won't dismiss the case in the absence of your senior, but if you are able to make a point, I will be able to grant you relief and you will get the credit. So be prepared. Even if you are sent to ask for an adjournment, get prepared with the case. Sooner or later, you will get one such opportunity, whether the judge refuses to accommodate, and then you have to argue and your senior is not present. So keep that in mind. Do prepare. It will be very boring in the beginning that you're reading briefs which you know you are not going to argue. But the chances will crop up occasionally, and maybe later, once you do well, you will get more chances. Now, it's all very well to know your pleadings. It's all very well to know your law. But there is an imperceptible factor which determines everything. It's the human being called the judge. Now, you have to understand the judge's mentality, judge's outlooks, judge's likes, and in particular the judge's dislikes. So some judges don't like ponderous arguments. Some love. I think that you must know, you must read your judge, because right or wrong, he may be an ass, but he's going to decide your case. So please remember that sit in his court, laugh at his stupid jokes, make eye contact, all these things matter. So I mean, you won't find them in textbooks, but I'm telling you from real experience. So also find out what the judge is interested in. Supposing he is a cricket freak, the case starts, you just tell him Australia had just got all out at 279 or something like that. He'll be thrilled with you, and you may get a softer hearing from him. So you find out, you have to be a bit like Sherlock to do these things. Find out, look at him. So judge is something which is paramount, whether you like it or not. Okay? So then also be prepared for judge being erratic, irritable. He may have had a fight with his wife in the morning. He may have got bad breakfast, or he may not have got breakfast, so he'll be irritable. Just be patient about judge's stupidity, judge's anger. These things happen. We are all humans and we all make mistakes. We all get irritable. But keep cool and never tell the judge what you said is totally wrong. Just say, you are absolutely right, but I want to show something else to you. So never call the judge, you're absolutely wrong. He may be, and many of the time they are. So I think this is something which you have to keep in mind. And the other things, I'm telling you some trade secrets now. Never take up a touchy case nearing lunchtime. The judge may be hungry, he may be wanting to rush to the loo. So don't, at that time, just while away the time, come back after lunch at 2, and that is the time when he'll be more receptive, or in the morning. So these are things which I don't think you will know from books, but these are things which happen in practice, and you have to be absolutely ready about it. And one of the prime qualities for a good lawyer would be that he should be absolutely, his memory should be very, very sharp, and recall should be very good. Second, he must, in a sense, have this, be an extremely observant person. You must observe what the other side is uncomfortable about, from the body language, from what they are whispering and all, and also the judge's body language also. And so I think I advise you to read a book by Desmond Morris called Man Watching. It is a fascinating book. It's out of print, but I'm sure your teachers would be able to get you. You'll get one used copy on Amazon or something. If I have an extra one, I'll send it to you. But it's a fascinating book on body language. And as court lawyers, body language is an extremely important thing for all of you to remember. When you finish arguing a case, it is always better to hand over a written note of what you argued. Because if the judge is burdened with 30, 40, 50 cases, his memory, by the time it sits down to dictate the judgment, may not be so sharp. He may not remember a relevant detail. Second thing, if the judge makes an error, you have a good ground for appeal by showing that this was what I argued and was not dealt with, or is being dealt with wrongly by the judge. Remember one thing, that you must develop a credibility with the court and the judges. The judges must learn to trust you. That is how you will get more and more relief. And therefore, sharp practices, please remember, judges also gossip amongst themselves. So if some lawyer is known to be who tells lies, who misleads, then certainly the judges will talk among themselves. Bad reputation gets around very fast. Good one takes time. Now, you cannot be a good human being without being interested in other things in life, such as literature, such as music, such as poetry, painting, dramatics, or any other hobby. Origami, whatever you like. Unless you are a good human being, you will not make a good lawyer. And please remember this, and it becomes extremely important. Remember to be kind to lesser beings. One thing which you must remember, you will all grow up, you are receiving excellent education, you have good background, all of you will grow up to be successful lawyers, but never forget the poor and the needy. Whenever the need comes, you had a person who spoke to you, who has a masterly work in legal aid, Justice Muralidhar, who had come here. His doctorate thesis was in legal aid. We have worked together in Supreme Court in many legal aid cases. And when you get an opportunity, offer to be amicus in a court. Once the court appoints you amicus, it is the greatest honor a lawyer can receive. That means the court trusts you. So this is by and large my thoughts about court practice. I surely invite your comments on that. On sports law, since I was asked to speak something, I'll tell you what the situation is. The Government of India in 2012 or something wanted a sports bill to be prepared. The bill was drafted and it's still doing the rounds of Parliament, Cabinet and all, but I'd like to tell you what the salient features of the bill were. One was age limit, 70. Beyond 70 you cannot be an office bearer of any sports. Second was that you cannot have more than 3 tenures in a particular post. This is true. You have seen sports association, I think Archery Association has 45 years, Mr. Vijay Kumar Malhotra has been the president. I don't know whether he has held a bow and arrow even in Ramlila, but he's there and he's there serving us. So we have to, that was the reason for that. The third most important thing about the bill is that 25% of the executive posts have to be held by persons of players of national level. So if it's a national body, if it's a state body, players of state level. This gives players a chance to stay. You'd be surprised to know that players like Kapil Dev could not become the members of the Haryana Cricket Association. So this is how the associations function. Then there was this IPL business, led to a report where owner was found shielding his son-in-law, saying that he is not a member of the team. He is not a member of the the body which owns this team, CSK, but it was found that he was not entirely correct. We had documents to show that that was so. That has led to then the Lodha committee, which has gone deep into the functioning of the cricket board. Some say they've been over-intrusive, but they've done so and they have come to certain conclusions which have now become the judgment of the Supreme Court, so they are binding all across. The fallout of this is that today other sports bodies, other sportsmen who do not play cricket are also, let me tell you one thing, BCCI with all its drawbacks is the best governed sports body in the country. So you can imagine the plight of the others. Now the other sportsmen, some Olympians, some celebrated sportsmen have come forward and they want that the Lodha committee recommendations, since they are the law of the land, should be implemented, and I agree with that position of law. while the facts were of the BCCI, the law laid down by the Supreme Court is a general law. And that petition is pending in the court. If that happens, I think more than cricket, it's the other sports which need some kind of a statutory compliance. They need to be better looked after. The players need a better deal, and that is on sports. So, I mean, the book which I have written, I have forgotten most of it, to be very honest with you. The first edition was in 2010. The second edition means you just touch up a thing here and there, was recent, but I don't remember the book offhand. So if you ask me some very pointed question, I may be found wanting. Okay. Thank you. I would like to now interact with you. Be fearless, be blunt. If you think what I have said is idiotic, I don't mind. You can go ahead. Okay. Because interacting with young minds always educates you, let me tell you. Because our minds are fossilized, yours are still fresh and vibrant. So I'd like to hear. Yeah. Yes, please. Just your name and then question.
I'm Ritvik. My question, so you spoke about what lawyers should do in the court. I was just wondering, do you have any pointers about what interns should do to get more from like a district court internship? Or
no, just speak a little loudly.
what should an intern do, an intern in the district court, to make the most out of the internship?
Well, if you are an intern in the district court, you get to know the real working of law. Those who have practiced on the appellate side only get papers. You see the client, you interact with him. You should make sure that you attend every meeting which your senior holds, and if possible, take more out of the client. Sometimes the client is a little overawed by the lawyer, but he may not be overawed by you. So take out more from him. Something might be useful which he has not been able to communicate. So I think as a district court intern, these are the things which would help you. And of course be prepared in every matter. Yes, please.
Good morning, sir. I'm Shan.
Take the mic, please.
Shan Bhattacharya.
Yeah.
So my question in particular is with regards to cash-rich leagues across the world.
Sorry.
Cash-rich leagues across the world, and with regard to how much a club should be allowed to maybe commodify a lifestyle or a product. Sir, for example, there was a club in third tier in German League Bundesliga, which is called the Leipzig FC. After the Red Bull founded and gotten a lot of funding into that particular club, it rose to the standards of a first league club and was called the RB Leipzig FC. An Indian example of the same, sir, would be the Pune club in IPL, which suddenly got founded by the Sanjeev Goenka Enterprises, and its entire name got changed into RPSG, which is the Rising Pune Super Giant, a reflection of the Rajiv Goenka group. So my question is, how far should there be a statutory introduction of rules and regulation as to how far a club can be used to commodify a lifestyle or a product?
Lifestyle of
Or a product.
the sportsman's image.
Yes, sir. A club being used to advertise a product or a lifestyle of the sponsors.
Well, you are right. It's now become ugly. You see a cricket team where there are 3 or 4, one on the sleeve, one at the back. But you see, the money comes from there. Please believe me, the gate money is nothing compared to what you get from sponsors, what you get from media broadcast. That is where the money comes. That's why the associations, state associations are not bothered. Stands are lying empty. They don't care. They will not reduce the rates. And I think when I was in charge of DDCA in Delhi cricket, in the South Africa test, I permitted 8,000 government students to come free, government school students, the less affluent ones, to come free for 5 days and give them snacks and drink. Now that increased, the stadium looked full, and that's what ought to be done. But, as you said, it is ugly, I agree with you, but it has become an evil necessity just like friction is, you know. Okay? Yes.
Sir? Sir? So my point is, how far is Supreme Court justified in directing BCCI to implement its reforms and still not calling BCCI as a state? There's a constitutional bench decision which calls BCCI as not a state.
Well, on state, I think the first judgment was mine. I did Delhi High Court, 2002, where I held that any association which, to the extent it performs public functions, I didn't call it state, I said amenable to the writ jurisdiction of the High Court. When the matter finally went up to the Supreme Court, this view was upheld. There was in Zee Telefilm scheme, there was a divergence of views. 3 judges held that it is state, 2 judges held that it is state, and even in Article 32 writ lie, 3 judges held that no, only the 226 writ lies. So, state may be a little too much, but certainly they have certain sovereign functions. They represent the country, they fly the national flag, and they sing the national anthem when any international tournament begins. So certainly they have vestiges of state, certainly, but to call it a state entirely and have a writ maintainable, one should call it state, then even a writ under Article 32 would lie. So I don't think that one need go that far. As long as there is writ court scrutiny, which now there is, I think that should be sufficient.
Question?
Sorry?
A follow-up question. Follow-up question.
Please.
Relying on the same, can we say that Supreme Court has powers to intervene in any private matter? Because there is no standard definition of when Supreme Court can intervene.
Well, you can't, look, the human enterprise is so diverse, you cannot crystallize what the private matters are. You can lay down general guidelines. Supposing, let's take BCCI, supposing they were to say that all the players of the Indian cricket team will come only from 3 northern states or 3 western states, as it used to be a long time ago. Now, that is something which is a matter which concerns public interest, because the composition of the team is affected. But supposing the BCCI were to say that we have chosen sponsor A or sponsor B, that might become a private thing. But if it was a state, then it will have to issue tenders, invite sponsors, but to that extent there should be room for accommodation and discretion. Yeah. Yes, please.
Good morning, sir. My name is Ajoy from the second year. I just had a question with regards to moving from the district courts to the high courts or even to the Supreme Court. Does the dependence on the idiosyncrasies of a judge or a justice shift at any level?
Promotions, you mean judges promotion?
No. If say you're practicing in the district court or the high court, does the dependence on the idiosyncrasies of a judge or a justice as to their preferences or their not preferences, does that shift at any level?
So what's the question, please?
Does it shift at any level between the district court or what? Does the dependence on a judge's preferences shift between the district and practicing at the district court or the high court?
No, the judge's errors can always be corrected at the high court. It's the Supreme and the high court judge's errors can be corrected in the Supreme Court. But it's the Supreme Court judge's errors which cannot be corrected.
I think what he was trying to ask was that the dependence on the judge's discretion, is it more in the higher levels than
Yeah. Higher you go, sorry, I didn't understand your question. The higher you go, the discretion becomes vaster, much vaster. In Supreme Court, there's total discretion. High Court, large distinction. District Court is always worried about his ACR being written in also. Yes.
So my question is with respect to the batting problem in cricket, because there are 2 contradictory views. Even sports people, they are asking about legalizing the batting. So what is your view? That are you in favor of legalizing it? And if yes, then why? If no, then
I've written it in my book also, and it's a part of my IPL report, which has been endorsed by Justice Lodha. I'm strongly in favor of legalizing betting. There are 3 or 4 reasons. Let me tell you what the ill effects are thought to be. Yes, people will start gambling and while away, as if they don't do it today. They do it today also, but they do it in the black market. The money all goes. Secondly, you can have, like for FIFA has a computer program by which suspicious betting can be detected, and the players can be warned, the management can be warned, and the results can be annulled. So if the betting is open, then suspicious activities will, look, human nature being what it is, certainly there will be misfeasance, there will be some fishy activities, but it will reduce it to a great extent. Because it's in domain. If a very weak team, supposing, let's say, Barcelona is playing the lowest side in the Spanish league, and suddenly people start betting heavily in favor of the side Sevilla or whatever it is, then there is a hint of suspicion, especially if Barca loses, that this match was fixed. So if you get advance intimation, you can warn the players, you can warn the teams. So that is the second part of it. The third is the amount of staggering revenue the government is going to get out of it, of even 20% tax. Right? And it is going to give immense amount of employment. Once you control it, like in UK you have a gaming federation, and the board controls it, people of impeccable integrity are integrated into that. So I think I am strongly in favor of betting being legalized, but it's a big moral call for the government to take, which I don't think any government is prepared to take till now. Otherwise it will help a lot. I mean, government's revenue will, I was told that in the India-Pakistan semi-final in the World Cup in 2011 in Mohali, the betting was minimum 20,000 crores in one match. So if you put 20% tax on that, can you imagine the staggering revenue the government would have got? And there are many people who do not bet because they don't want to get into the clutches of the illegal bettors and get into the clutches of law. But if betting is open, it is permitted, as it is in many countries, then certainly many more people will bet. Last, all the money of the betting syndicates fuels the underworld. That's all the money will come out. The funding of the underworld would be reduced greatly. So these are some of the factors, but as I said, the real call is the government's, and it's a big moral call. I don't think the government is yet prepared to take it. Yes. Why have the question dried up?
Yeah, my name is Vaibhav. I teach here. It's a pleasure having you here, sir. I have a question on a slightly different topic. A lot of time, we have spent interacting with seniors in the profession, with judges, and listening to the complaint that students from such law universities aren't joining litigation or practice.
Yes.
And this forum specifically, which is a totally student-run initiative, tries to address that particular issue. Now, talking of solutions, we all know the questions. Talking of solutions, in some law school has started some sort of stipend for those who want to enter litigation, so that initially there is that encouragement which is there. Some suggest that the Bar Council of India, if it can provide for insurance for all its members through the state bar associations, it's a bar association matter, why can't, do you think it would be feasible to start any sort of this honorarium or encouragement for those interested in litigation, so that they can take that option up, while we know that law firm salaries are very good? So we are talking of solutions here. So if you can
say this. You said this. Justice Rohinton Nariman, who is now a judge of the Supreme Court, before he was elevated, he donated 1 crore rupees to set a Supreme Court welfare trust. Justice J.S. Verma was originally the chairman of the trust. After his death, I am the chairman. We did identify 4 lawyers who we wanted to litigate in Supreme Court as young lawyers, and we provided them stipend of 25,000 rupees, and we gave them SCC online free and all. So out of the 4 to 8, 2 or 3 have become successful lawyers. 1 went back, and regrettably 3 joined the corporate world.
So if the fund is still there, students may get...
It's still there, but we don't have enough money. We have enough money, but now we have, because we found that monitoring was a difficult task. But initiative like this can be started. I think if the government were to propose that those who fund this will get a tax benefit, I'm sure corporates would come around and give donation for this thing. Because, you know, one of the regrets which we all have, that such elite schools as, and I hate the word law school because I'm telling you it sounds very American, you know. In fact, I must tell you, when I was in Delhi High Court, it was called the National Law, whatever it was called the National Law School of Delhi University. So I said, what is this going on? School and university in one day. Luckily, I think they have now dropped it. But the regret was that all the elite students want to become desk-oriented in a corporate office, and frankly, it is understandable. Many have been working on loans, and the salary is extremely good. But the risk is that you get used to that salary, lose your enterprise, and you burn out in a year or two, and then you hate your job. You know, and the hours are inhuman, you know, because the US client, so you are 12 hours, your whole life, whole your physique, all your, this thing is completely gone. So yes, it is good in the beginning. I would advise you, no harm in trying it out for a couple of years, but don't stick on too long. You get used to the salary, you will never be able to leave and take the jump or the plunge, whatever you like to call it, into the profession where returns are uneven, but when they come, they're great. And above all, you're your own boss. Please remember, you can tell even a biggest industrialist in the country to go to hell if you don't want to do his case. So that is... Okay? Yes?
Good morning, sir.
Yeah.
So, I'm a first year law student. So, during my internship at the Bombay High Court, so not essentially at the higher level courts, but at the lower level courts, sir, we realized that certain people, such as the judicial clerks, just in order to get your file from the back office to the main courtroom, they ask you for like some kind of bribe money. So that was observed by me in a certain case. I do not know about what happens in the higher courts, sir, but at a principal level, aren't these practices wrong? Like,
No, I'm sorry.
I mean, considering the fact that, like, what are the judges aware about these? Are the judges aware about these?
I think the mic's too close.
So what he's saying is, when he was an intern he interned in Bombay in the last semester. So in lower courts, there's a practice of paying money for the file to come from the Almar to the judge.
It's there. It's there. It's regrettable, but it is there.
So my question being, what kind of solution can there be in order to prevent such?
Well, the file must move naturally. There must be an order by the district judge that no file will remain on any desk for more than 24 hours. Once the district judge does it, if the High Court is strict, if the supervision is good, then these things are not required. But when there is lax supervision, the High Court is not too bothered, then these things happen and will continue to happen. It's a sorry state of affairs when this happens, but you are absolutely right. Yes. Mike, please.
Please pass it on to him.
Hello. Hi sir, I'm Anubhav. Sir, there have been a few recent news reports which suggest that there is a proposal before the committee of administrators appointed by the Supreme Court to govern the BCCI, that there is a proposal to give a 500% pay hike to all Indian test cricketers. These news reports also suggest that this proposal is likely to be accepted. So how would you...
Whose suggestion is this?
Sir, the BCCI, like, there is a proposal before the Committee of Administrators.
Oh, they have given this suggestion.
No, it's before them. They have to approve it or reject it.
So what's the question?
Sir, my question is, if they were to approve such a proposal, how do you reconcile that with two committee reports which have gone on to say that the BCCI needs to go on its finances better, and also that this is a committee of administrators appointed by the Supreme Court to that exact effect, when these cricketers who are already amongst the highest paid in the world have been offered a 500% pay hike?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
The question is, they are already among the highest earning players in the world. So how justified would it be?
No, I don't think the players need to be paid more. The international players, no. Ranji players, certainly. The rise should be in the level of the players who are not at the international level. International players get enough now, as opposed to the 60s and the 50s when they used to get 50 rupees, and that's about all. But today the players get absolutely enough. I don't think any fees hike is justified. They also get endorsements, as you can see, them peddling various goods, and good luck to them. They have a very short shelf life, so if they make money, nothing wrong in that. Yeah, please.
Ma'am, please put the switch on, ma'am.
So for the last 2-3 years, there haven't been any appointments in the state of, in the combined state, High Court of Hyderabad. Only promotions from district judges to High Court judges is happening. The reason being that this National Judicial Appointments Commission being struck down, and they are not able to come to that terms on the memorandum of procedure. Do you have any idea what is it that is blocking the government?
I can tell you the recent developments. I think the deadlock is almost over. The government, the collegium appears to have agreed to the national security clause, and the government may agree to withdrawal of that secretariat for keeping data for the appointment. So it should be over. I mean, that's my information, but there's no official communicate to that effect. Yes.
There was one hand at the back also. Maybe go first.
Yeah, let's finish that.
Just wait.
Sir, I didn't get that. What was blocking actually? What is the tussle between the government and the Supreme Court? What was the main?
Earlier, the collegium was worried that the security clause will be a blanket clause to block any appointment which the government doesn't like. And now I think they've gone a step further, that in case there's a security issue raised by the government, the collegium will consider it, but if again it reiterates, then appointment has to go through. That is the understanding, but it's nothing, I mean, this is what one gets to hear from the papers also, otherwise also. I hope it happens because it's blocking everything. Yes. Yes, there was somebody there.
My name is Aditya, I'm from the second year. So my question is about the fact that since you've worked intensively with administrative bodies in sport, how difficult is it at this point to promote sporting activities at grassroots levels when there are state level bodies or administrative bodies which create certain structural barriers to sportsmen either getting enough funding for their sport or for people who have aspirations for, say, medals at, say, the Olympics or the Commonwealth Games, because we see a great disparity between certain sports where people can get individual sponsors like, say, Gaganjeet Narang or others who were able to get a certain kind of fame or certain achievement which would give them that kind of leg up or a boost, while there are others who are faltering and aren't able to access enough funds or enough sporting facilities in order to get them to a stage where they are ready for international competition. So, like, a solution to that possibly.
I would say that the government has a large role to play here, you know, not only in, as I said, if you make sponsorship of sports, give a tax incentive, people will come forward, business houses will come forward. Secondly, you see, there are sports which will not attract sponsors because some sports have become popular just because of television, and the media has a large role to play here. Can you imagine recently there was a study which said Kabaddi is drawing more eyeballs than the IPL. Now that's something remarkable, and I'm very proud of it, though I love cricket, let me tell you, but I'm very happy to hear that. It needs, a good entrepreneur to come into the field. Look, with all its faults, IPL is a brilliant idea. It's an admixture of English Premier League, the NBA, National Broadcast, and a bit of Formula One in it. So I think if various sports the government should encourage, and the more important part is just see how many players, I take cricket for instance, have come from small towns today. Our team, Indian cricket team, there was a time it used to be 9 Bombay players, 2 from Madras and 1 from Bangalore, and North was not represented at all. One thing which brought North into cricket was the Hindi commentary, because the commentary in English was a little above many, and even those who understood cricket, some of them found it absolutely dense. So I think that is important. And you see small town boys coming up. Dhoni come from Jharkhand, hails from Uttaranchal. Look at the rise there. And today's team, I think you will hardly have, last test match, there was no player from Bombay at all, which unprecedented in India's cricket history. Football, it used to be exclusively Bengal, bit of Kerala and Goa, and now look at Northeast rise. And so these are things where the state government, the central government has a large role to play. They must provide sporting turfs. Many of these players have come from gully cricket. They don't have a proper ground to play. Every district, if a stadium is built, practice facility for popular sports like football, hockey, turf. Hockey needs turf now. So the government can provide for that. I think once that is done, things can improve. But what you said is absolutely right. It's a crying need of the hour. Yes, sir. Yes, please. Okay, please. I'm glad. I thought it was a co-ed institute, no questions from ladies, huh?
Good morning, sir. I'm Shruja from second year. So my question to you is, in the recent past there have been demands about making betting legalized in sports. So what is your take on that?
Okay, anyway, since you've asked, I'll tell you. I strongly support legalizing betting. And the young lady, please. No, don't please. I strongly support but betting should be legalized. 3 or 4 reasons. One, it gets a lot of revenue. B, underhand activities become restricted. And thirdly, in the sense that even it generates a lot of employment, and you can detect fishy activities. Yes. Yes, please.
Thank you, sir, for the question.
Thank you, sir, for the talk. So firstly, my question would be a follow-up on the question relating to betting. So if you say that you legalize betting, I think there's a direct correlation between the activities of betting and the resultant activity of match fixing. So how do you address this correlation dichotomous relationship? So if you legalize betting, there will be a direct consequence on the enhancement of the instances of match fixing.
No, look, aren't you aware that betting is going on rampantly just now also?
Yes, sir, it is.
Because it's underhand, it's bookies who are illegal. They are in league with sometimes the police authorities also who ignore it or for some various persuasions permit it. Now, sometimes pressure comes, somebody is caught. This is going on. It's inevitable, it's human nature. Start from Mahabharata, people have been betting away their wives, they've been betting away their kingdoms. So I think it's a human nature to bet. Will you not bet each other that I'll finish my essay before you? Yes, it is a bet. Or I can jump, or I can win over the affections of that pretty lady before you. I mean, that happens. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think the second thing is that in the sense, you say that betting is now, it'll lead to people getting bankrupt and all that. They're getting bankrupt today also. And then they get into the grips of the underworld, which is much worse. So I think it'll be, your follow-up question is correct. Yes, the danger is always there. Anything in excess is bad. Alcohol is bad. Cigarettes are bad in excess. So, but in excess, anything is bad. Excess food is bad. Yeah. Yes, please.
I have one more question. So most of us in this room are from the first, second and third years of the law university and thus have not much quite dealt with sports law per se. And as I understand it, sports law is an admixture of various domains of law. For example, law relating to broadcasting contracts, law relating to medical jurisprudence involved in accidents in sporting events. So if you could just give us a brief primer on what exactly is the domain or province of sports law, that could enhance interest of some of us.
I think you have already enumerated the major ones, that yes, sports, there is no law of sports as such. This laws which affect sports, laws which fall within the domain of sports. One of certainly is the entertainment, this thing, media contracts, players contracts, then insurance, as you rightly said, sponsorship, how these are arranged. Then also, one thing which I forgot to mention is that adjudicatory authorities for discipline and match fixing and those things are there, and appellate bodies, which is where today a lot of litigation is going on in drug related cases, where lots of lawyers have now started specializing in this subject. So these are the spin-offs. Yes, so of course it will be contract law when you get into sponsorship, so you have to study the contract. When you get into the media, then you will have to see the cable networks and all those litigation, and so on and so forth in other subjects also. So you learn that branch of law which is relevant to sport. Of course, you learn that in any case in your course study, but when you start specializing or going into the sports domain, then these things will happen. There are laws which affect contract, labor and employment laws. So, and also this sponsorship, what kind of rights a sponsor has. You will just ask a question about how many stickers, is it good? It's not good, but it's necessary. Okay. Yes, please. Yeah, everybody, have time, don't worry. And even afterward for 10-15 minutes, some who don't like to ask questions in open, I know, you can come and talk to me. Yeah.
Hello,
yes,
sir.
please.
I'm Shweta Rao from the second year. This is a follow-up to the earlier question from Aditya about what the government can do to ensure that sportsmen get resources, and this is more specific to how women in sporting can get the recognition that they deserve, given that other sources like media have failed. Like, what can bureaucracy and what can the government do to ensure that?
I think I forgot to mention that an important feature of the sports bill, that every executive committee must have one woman. This is a very important recommendation made by us, that there must be a sexual harassment committee in every sports body. I have some experience of it. The last case which I argued in the Supreme Court was Vishakha, so I have some background on this. So this is an important thing, that women. The other thing is media. Media has to give coverage to ladies' events, which are slowly coming up, but generally it is clubbed with the men's events and it's given, but doesn't matter, whichever way it comes, it comes. Just see in badminton now, ladies are much above the rankings of the men. So it will take time, but I hope it is done and the government pursues it vigorously. For a very long time, the BCCI did not recognize the English ladies cricket team. That the lady who's Diana Avalji said that I was told that why, this is just a hobby, what are you doing, this is not, we don't take it seriously. So that attitude is slowly disappearing. And if the government brings the sports bill, then I think the representation of women will become important. And the Supreme Court has gone a long way by putting a woman cricketer in the Committee of Administrators. I think it's a welcome step. Yes.
So I have another question. Sometimes the issue which is raised by our students is, since I am teaching here, so once they get into the real practice of law, whether as an intern or after completing their course as a practicing advocate, whether it is your corporate world or litigation, the issue which they raise is that, sir, that the real practice of law is very different from what we are taught in the law schools. So my question is that, okay, how relevant this study of law for them is it a mere formality, or so you can recall from your student days maybe that how much was there the difference between the study of law?
Well, I'd like to answer this question by saying yes, the study of law is relevant to a certain extent, but the real practice of law you only learn in a courtroom. So in theory you must be knowing everything, but how to apply the law, how to deal with real life situations, things are not the same as they are in the classroom. Of course, a good academic background doesn't hurt, but the learning of practice of law only begins in courtrooms. So I would say law, at least in my time, was the easiest degree to acquire and the toughest profession to practice. Now it's not the easiest degree to acquire, but the toughest profession, it still remains.
Hello sir, my name is Rahul from first year.
Yes. Yeah, there was somebody here. Yes, please.
Good morning, sir. I'm Aprajita from first year. I wanted to ask you a question regarding the gender inequality in litigation itself. Firstly, we see
gender equality
in litigation, the practice of litigation itself. Firstly, for example, in Punjab and Haryana High Court itself, for every woman advocate, there are at least 10 male advocates in proportion. Secondly, during the observation of proceedings, I noticed that when a woman advocate is providing her arguments, there's a tendency in male advocates to talk over or explain certain terms that the woman is arguing or using, where the other side takes it upon themselves as a responsibility to explain whatever she is doing. So my first question is there a disincentive for female advocates, for women to enter this profession? And why is there a certain perception that women are not as capable as men when it comes to being a good advocate?
Well, I think you're right. There is a patronizing attitude, patriarchal attitude, which does exist, and it's slowly disappearing. I can happily tell you that the two young girls work in my office, there are no male employees. But that's an aberration. Yes, because it is believed. I'll tell you what the other side of you, I don't agree with it, but it is, women will get married, they will have children, then they will lose the profession. Now that is the impression which has to be cleared by the seriousness with which you work. But today, let me tell you, a lot of lady lawyers are doing excellent work and they are treated as equals. But yes, in the beginning, I think you have to work twice as hard as a male to make it successful. I'm sorry, but these are the real facts of life. These are unfortunate. They should not be there. But let me tell you, it is gradually disappearing and the patronizing attitude is gone. And because sometimes you find the women lawyers are much better than the men lawyers. So it is happening. It will take time to evolve, as our society also is very patriarchal. It is gradually evolving. Yes.
Hello sir, I'm Rahul from first year. Hello. Sir, my question is basically related to corruption in BCCI. So there is a suggestion which says we should stop politicians to be a part of any sports authority. So what's your take on it?
I would say barring as a profession may not be right, but it's the law of the land now, so we are bound by it. But I think what was meant was that you are a full-time working in the government, so you can't take up this thing. You're a bureaucrat working full-time, so you won't be able to devote time. That was perhaps the rationale. But to shut out any profession per se may not be the right thing, but it's not for me to say anymore because the Lodha Committee recommendations have now become the judgment of the Supreme Court. My own view is no, that you can't bar any category of persons from being there.
So sir, can't we give opportunity to sports people only to be a member of their governing bodies? Or
no, look, the recommendations which have been accepted are that all players who have represented the state will automatically become members of the associations now. That's a very, very good thing. I mean, you'd be surprised that half of the Ranji Trophy players, I can tell you in Delhi, are not members of the DDCA. And things are the same elsewhere also. So I think it's very good that some of the recommendations which you say are coming forth and will be implemented hopefully in the next 5 to 6 months, where players will get a more say in the body. I think your question is absolutely valid, and it's an important question. Yes, madam.
Good morning, sir. Good evening, sir. My name is Krishna. So from what I read that you passed a judgment which brought the BCCI answerable under writ petitions. So BCCI is this big wig which hadn't been touched till then. So my question to you is the BCCI really amenable to change for the better, like in terms of their willingness to enforce decisions and inquiries and findings passed by committees, or are they very stuck on the status quo as it is right now?
Look, when you lose a position of privilege and power, it's not easy to let go. And BCCI is in the throes of that thrombosis, if I may use the word, where they're gradually losing power. The LODA committee is getting implemented, and it's hurting many vested interests. But I think it's happening. What you said is happening. Yes.
Good morning, sir. I'm Sivaraman from the second year. So my question is, so usually in law schools there's this view that prevails that if you start your career in the judicial field as a litigating lawyer, you have a higher chance of being in the higher ranks of the judiciary than if you start your career as by writing the judicial service and being a judge in the lower court. So how true does this hold?
Well, I think the salary structure is improving for the district judiciary, but it must be made clear that you see what is the problem with the district judiciary's elevation to the Supreme Court, High Court and the Supreme Court is that the seniority principle is too firmly entrenched in the mindset of those who promote. If you permit, look, a meritorious student, a meritorious district judiciary officer, a fast-track promotion, one who performs well, one who writes good judgment, is given what used to be called double promotion in schools, giving faster promotions. If a bright young district judge is sure of making it to the High Court, then I think many bright youngsters, the quality would improve. Today, people do not want to go to district judiciary for various reasons which are justified. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Good morning, sir. Sir, I'm Dayar from first year. My question was a follow-up to Aditya's question only, which was about how there is no incentivization in sports at the lower levels in India. So I wanted to draw an analogy with, say, USA, where you will find that there is a scouting culture even in the lower fields, and even in, say, the teams of Harvard go to down south, the athletics team goes down south to practice. There are incentives at the very basic root levels as well. However, we fail to see that in India, where my discrepancy lies is that it is not that India does not have, say, fervor for the sports. India is one of the countries which does almost, say, worship cricket. So how is that we do not have a structural, how do we do not have incentivization at lower levels for better players to come up to the higher levels?
Better, what's your last
why is that there is a discrepancy that we do not have structural incentives at the beginning, at the root grass level, for the possibility of, because we say that our cricketers are paid, the cricketers that play at the international level are the ones amongst who are paid the highest. And yet we do have a structural discrepancy where the lower cricketers or where the ones playing at state levels are not able to come up. So why is there a structural discrepancy here?
In the sports, you mean?
In the sports, yes, sir.
Yeah, there is, because the associations are not too interested in sports. They're interested in perks of office. That is why. But it does need, you see, these national level organized tournaments must be organized at a fixed interval. Sometimes the national games are not held for 2 to 3 years. And a sportsman has a very short span. He may be top of this thing in 2015, But by the time the games are held in 2017, he may not be in the peak of his form. So I think, of course, you are right. There is structural deficiency and it needs to be addressed very, very soon. Yeah. Yeah.
Hello sir, I am Rizwan from the first year. I have like 2 points. First, the WADA, it always brings a list of drugs which are to be prohibited by the sports persons. But it is generally been known that there are many more drugs other than the list which are used. Like they first check the list at the start of the year and they research into what more drugs they can use in order to enhance their performances and they use it. So would it be better to just remove the restrictions of drugs and enhance your abilities?
That's a point of view which is that, no, I don't think you should laugh. It's a very important point of view. Let me first tell you my views of WADA. It is an intensely racist and overbearing body. I mean, if a government were to frame a law saying that you have to tell me which every day of the year where you're going to be whereabouts clause, it would be struck down by the court in no point of in 30 seconds. You have WADA asking players to indicate every time where they are. Now that's a totally intrusive right of privacy is severely violated. And WADA is a private body, please remember. It has only 16 persons who vote. Most of our countries do not have a vote, and the Asians and the blacks always get the rough end of the stick. Tyson Gay, who was a silver medalist in Olympics, for a drug violation, the US drug agency gave him 1 year. WADA did not appeal. There were 4 girls, Indian, in 400 meters who had ingested with ginseng some contaminated product. They were given 1 year by NADA, that is the Indian Drug Authority, and WADA appealed against that and got it enhanced to 2 years. They do it regularly. It's a horrid body, if you ask me. It should be got rid of. Somebody else should come. Look, there is a strong point of view, let people kill themselves, let there be no drug, this thing. It's not a point of view which is outrageous. There is some merit in it. But yes, but I'm giving you my views on WADA. It's a body which is really, really bad.
And the second thing, sir, should there be some restrictions to the maximum level of wage a player can receive? Because in football we are seeing this...
Maximum number of?
Wage, maximum wage a player can receive, salary. So in football we are seeing the Chinese Super League coming forward and they're paying Carlos Tevez 700,000 pounds per week, which is like £1 every second. And there are people who are unable to earn £1 a day. So like, should there be some restriction to that?
No, I don't think these restrictions work. It's the marketplace. So if somebody plays well, he'll get more. Somebody who doesn't play well will get less. Because these restrictions can be overcome by giving incentives, by giving a car, by giving a house, something which is not on board, which you do not know. So I don't think this kind of restrictions should be there or would work. They'll be impossible to monitor. Though, let me tell you, most football leagues have, like each club can spend in English Premier League a particular amount, and this kind of limits are still there.
Yeah, there is this financial fair play regulations and all.
Yeah, they are there. They are violated also regularly by indirect means. Yes.
More questions? I saw 2 follow-ups and 1 more
question. Can we have the last 2?
Yeah. After these 2 more follow-ups, we
Sir, in the Ajay Jadeja judgment that you talked about, you clearly sounded a note of caution when you said that just because they are amenable to writ jurisdiction, I don't mean to say that every internal matter of BCCI will be answerable in front of the High Courts. In light of the clear sound of caution that you had sounded in the 2002 judgment, how do you see the Supreme Court appointing a member of the CAG into the Apex Council of BCCI how do you see the the Supreme Court coming out and saying that tender documents for broadcasting has to be brought out in the public, and we will finally take a call on whether or not the tender for broadcasting has to be accepted? One, and in light of this and on a reading of the Supreme Court judgment, do you think that somewhere the public function test has changed into a public interest test? Because there's a lot of invocation of the tears of the cricket fan in the Supreme Court judgment. So is the Supreme Court saying that the tears of other sports lovers are not really important, and we are going to be looking at the interest of cricket because there is a lot of public interest in it? So are we seeing a change from public function to public interest?
You have given a long statement. Your questions are very few. The question is, just rephrase your question again. What is your query?
So the question is, has the public function test which you...
Okay, I remember now, because it was a long one, so I didn't forgot. Now, what you said, I was a single judge of the Delhi High Court. The huge battery of lawyers led by K.K. Venugopal was arguing for BCCI, and my order was subject to appeal in division bench and appeal to Supreme Court. So I had to tread cautiously because I wanted to create a new branch of law, but I did not want to be too radical about it. Yes, what you said about these broadcast contracts and all, the Supreme Court has now found it fit to, so I was proceeding cautiously. But if I was sitting in the Supreme Court, I would have expanded it. That's one. Second is that whether the Supreme Court has gone too far, well, it's a final judgment. You can't quarrel with that. Whether some of the judgment of the Supreme Court may not be right, but they have to be obeyed because they are final. And yes, I think the other sports, cricket gets undue attention because it's the most popular sport. But gradually the other sports are also coming into their own. That's all I can say. One last question. Before you ask a question, when will you stop? I permit a last question.
There's one follow-up at the back, last row.
No? Okay. That'll be the last question.
Yeah, there's one and there's one more at the back.
Sure.
Hello. This is Aditya again. So this was a question about, a follow-up actually about what you said about the seniority principle and how the district court judges should be elevated at some level. And so my question was that if you have young meritorious lawyers or judges for that matter who can or have the ability to go to higher judiciaries and like work there, would there be a problem then when senior counsels try to strong arm judges at that level to actually give decisions in their favor, and would you see this as a problem happening at the higher judiciary?
Well, it's a problem not only in the High Court but the Supreme Court also. It depends on the judge. I would say that apart from integrity, the best tribute you can pay to a judge is saying that it does not matter who appears in his court. It only matters what the case is. That, as a judge, I would consider it the best tribute somebody can give me, best praise which I can get. Yes, it is true, but that depends on the weakness of the judges, that they get cowed down by the big name and without going, I mean, not so much by the merit of the matter, but by the name of the person who's appearing. Okay. Yes. That's all. Last now. Anybody else? Now I want to wind up. Sorry, I have a flight to catch.
Yes. Sir, as a former Chief Justice of a High Court, can you please explain how a collegium works? Plus, what is your opinion of forced transfer of High Court judges?
Well, insert. It's a weak remedy for a judge who is unfit. Because once a judge is confirmed, he can only be removed by the Parliament. So, if the judge has some allegations against him which appear to be genuine, frankly, transferring doesn't help because he can do everything in the transferred court also. So I think the court and the government have to come with better solutions on this. This transferring is no remedy. Of course, where some nexus are developed between some lawyers and all, then it may help. But otherwise, transfer. Supposing some judge is incredibly rude to everybody, if he goes to another court, he'll be the same. So I don't think that can help. That's all. Thank you very much for your patience.
Firstly, I would like to thank Justice Mudgal for taking out time from his very busy schedule. He also has an engagement today in Bombay after this. So thank you, sir, for coming to Nalsar. And thank you everyone for being a part of this lecture. So the primary takeaway that we can take as law students, as first and second year, third year law students from this talk is that how to incorporate our interests, our values, the interests that we chose over and we chose law over those interests. So many of us used to play sports but didn't choose sports as a career but law as a career. And as a former judge and even as a litigator and before and after that as a judge, sir has very well manifested how he took sports into the field of law, and his career manifests his interests. So if we choose careers such as litigation and thereafter expand in that manner, as sir said, we are our own bosses and we can do whatever we want to do with our career path. So I think that should be the primary takeaway from this talk. Thank you everyone for coming. I hope we look forward to seeing you in similar numbers in our coming talks. Thank you so much.
Can I just add one thing? When you said that I took sports into law in the Ajay Jadeja judgment, slightly erratic. Because 1989, 13 cricketers were banned when they were returning from West Indies by playing a private match. I was the counsel for them.
Yes, sir. So I said that as a litigator also, sir has.
That's all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.